I struggled with the concept of grant funding. Zanele Thabo and I work at Actu Bumbano, and in our evolution, we were far more interested in the critical reflection part of our work. We convene space like this, but usually a bit longer with a few more people, to reflect on our own practice and our own agency, and whether we were actually part of the problem of maintaining the power dynamics that come with being in the development aids sector, or whether we were actually genuinely acting in solidarity with local struggles. And because we're an organization that is made up of both European and Southern African DNA, our initial funders sit in our organization, they're on our board. And I remember resisting during COVID when we were going to underspend, because you can't convene conversations in COVID, right? And we actually had to return a big chunk of money because we weren't ready to become a grant maker. Because often when you introduce money into the relationship, it fundamentally alters the nature of that relationship. And you find that people start hanging out with you because you're loaded. They're not so interested in you when you don't have a good, nice conversation. So we had to manage that dynamic. But as we managed that dynamic, we realized how important money actually is too, as an enabler of action and agency. So as much as there's all the attendant problems, there's also a hell of a lot of positive work that money can enable. And so we launched what we call our Solidarity Support Facility, which is really trying to change the language of our small grants facility. We tried not to use the word grants, but yeah, it's impossible. English is very limiting in that regard. So our Solidarity Support Facility is actually a small grants facility. And it's really quite a simple thing. It's really quite simple. And the reason we're having this conversation, amongst others, is that we recently convened a small reflective moment for ourselves. Our hugely talented but massively small team of Zanele Thabo and Ashley was feeling the pressure of managing this facility, and we thought, are we doing it right? Are we doing something wrong? Let's take some time out and invite some critical reflectors with us. So we had a small group of people go through this. And what was really good is that it affirmed our approach. But it did raise a number of challenges and questions. And we thought, as much as there's all these hashtag movements of trying to change the way grant making is done, and I think we're doing a lot of that. I'm not sure if a lot of the hashtags are doing a lot of it. So we thought, let's have an informal chat and see what else can we put onto the table and to spark the conversation. Because actually, ultimately, shifting the power, if you really want to do it, is not that hard. You can do it. But it's not happening as much as it should. So I'm going to mention just 4 areas that came out of this conversation. And then, whatever comes from that. What we do is every year we do a public call for proposals. We put it in our newsletter, which reaches quite a number of people in the region and globally, and people go online and submit their applications on our online system. It's grown. In the first year we had, how many applicants, Thabo? Where's Thabo? We must have had about 50 tops, right? 40 even. Probably even less. This year we had 250. So in a matter of 3 years, it's exponentially grown. And we make grants of between 10 and 30,000 rand. So very, very small. So the 4 issues I want to raise about how we do it, and I'm telling you this because I'm hoping it puts into the conversation very simple, practical things that don't require you to go and do a PhD to get it right. To actually fundamentally shift how you get resources to activists on the ground. We've got so the first point I want to make is that we have very low entry barriers. And that means that all you've got to do is a registered organization. We tried giving to individuals, didn't work. A couple of the guys scarpered with the money and you couldn't find them for love of money, right? So you've got to be a registered organization. It's a bit of a restriction, but it's a fairly simple If you don't have a registration, we can talk about a fiscal hosting. And linked to that is that we have fairly minimal compliance requirements. Right? Don't be a bunch of ex-murderers or racists or xenophobes. But keep your receipts, which you've made your payments, and send them. And if you've lost the receipt, send a picture of the workshop that you did. We'll believe you that you bought food with that. So fairly low compliance regime. The flip side of that, you've got to deal with risk and you've got to deal with due diligence, right? Because unfortunately, there's very few places where you actually can just give money away and not worry about how it's accounted for. Although I know some organizations in this room who will quite happily do that. But I'm not mentioning any names in case I are. So that's the first area. The second area is our grants are small. For the local young people who've come together to organize a cleanup in their community, they don't need 150,000 rand. In fact, they probably wouldn't know what to do with it. So they're small and they can be absorbed and they happen quickly. That's one thing we've become much better at, is getting the turnaround on those grants relatively quickly. Not quick enough, but we're getting there. We encountered all sorts of obstacles like Reserve Bank controls. These days you can't even send money to customs union countries. You've got to get Reserve Bank permission to do that. But we found ways around that. The challenge that comes with that issue is sheer volume, because you're trying to move big numbers of small chunks of money. And it's, I doff my hat to Thabo, who does most of the legwork. Thank God Thabo's there. But it does take a lot of work, so your transaction costs can be quite, I don't know if it's called transaction costs. For a period of time we're insanely busy and we want to lose our minds. But we get the stuff out quite quickly that other organizations aren't prepared to. The third area that I want to mention is that these grants are for action focus. Right? They're for action, social justice action activities. So they're time bound and they happen within a year. So we're trying not to worry about, that confusing time in accounting when you have to carry over expenses into the new year and all that nonsense. So we keep them small, tight, time bound, activity focused. And I'm almost at my 8 minutes. The flip side is, it doesn't take away the real need for institutional support. We haven't quite worked that one out yet, because institutional support requires a little bit more of a relationship. With this, we're able to start the relationship. It's almost like a first date. And then once we've got them on the hook, then we invite them into the social justice, into the solidarity hub space. My last point, Chair, and I can see you looking at your watch. Is that, and probably this is the part where one of the points made in the report of our last convening was, we do it more as an art than as a science. So as much as we can have the most comprehensive guidelines on a grant-making system, if it's got no politics, you're dead in the water. If it's something that is just about how do we mechanically ensure that the money reaches and that due diligence is done, without trying to get into the politics of the work that you're trying to support, I think it's going to be very difficult for you to actually do. So we're committed to local agency. We're committed to not just paying lip service to the fact that communities know best how to resist their own dehumanization. So if they write a proposal that doesn't quite fit your university degree English, there's no reason to resist it. You have to constantly be checking your own positionality. And the three of us do that very well. When Zanele gets on a high horse and says, this is a rubbish proposal, Thabo and I jump on her and say, you're wrong. You haven't read between the lines of what's there. So the politics of it becomes quite important. And I'm going to pause there, Jesse, and maybe resume later on. Thank you.